Kia ora katoa, kia ora Aotearoa. Kia ora, Megan Tapsell. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is the 7th interview in our series for Te Wiki Aotearoa Māori 2022. So Megan is a first timer in our series. We had in 2020 we had 35 rangatira share their personal stories. So we're doing a little bit of a recap, but also having some new guests that weren't part of that, but with the same set of questions and looking to achieve the same. So I'll set the scene in a little moment, but first of all, I'd like to welcome you. So haere mai, and if I can invite you to introduce yourself, everybody, Megan.
Kia ora, ko te mea tuatahi ki te mihi atu ki a koe raiona. Ngā mihi mō tō tautoko i tēnei kaupapa nunui ko te reo Māori. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge you, Ryan, for the work that you're doing in this space. It's really important. This journey isn't ours alone, and it's important that we connect with those and all those that support it to make it successful. Tēnā koutou, ko Megan Tapsell tōku ingoa, he reo no Aotearoa, me Ngāti Raukua ki te tonga hoki, no make tuahau. So I'm Megan Tapsell, and I hail from the mighty Aotearoa land, from Maketu, where I was born and bred. But on my mum's whakapapa side, I also connect down to Ngāti Raukua ki te tonga, to Otaki, where I'm part of the Kākik whānau. So just in terms of my arahi, the pathway with reo, in Maketu, where I grew up, we were predominantly, probably back in the 70s, 80s, 90% Māori. And in terms of the area where I grew, so quite strong connections with the marae and our people in that area. But as was common in that time, despite my grandparents being fluent Māori speakers, my parents weren't. And as I grew through and looked around the area, I challenged my parents as a 12 or 13-year-old around just education and school. And I requested to go to a boarding school, and they chose Hatoa Hohepa, St. Joseph's Māori Girls College down in Napier. And I think that was the opportunity where I was really in a system that embraced te reo and really with all the other amazing wahine that I went through school with, actually with Miss Kingi on us, Georgina Kingi, who is our principal and a massive advocate in this space of growing young Māori women. It wasn't a choice, and it not being a choice and being embedded in a system at that time that embraced te ao Māori thinking and our language, it made me question and look back at the environment that I'd grown up in. And I went home to my parents and I challenged them. I actually threw accusations at them around why they didn't have the language. So as a teenager, probably I would say embarrassed that I didn't have as much knowledge as I thought I should have. I then went to further my learning, went to Waikato University, where I studied law and Māori, embedded myself in te tiriti and in that world. And I think it's at that time where you start to get a broader understanding, because we weren't taught in schools around our history, around actually what happened through the early 1900s. The extermination of it. And so I think it was then, and as I've got older, I've looked back and, you know, it's not our parents and our grandparents' fault. We were caught up in the system that taught them that the Pākehā system was a priority, and my parents did the best for all of us. I spent 15 years in the UK, so despite the having the capability of being a fluent te reo Māori speaker, 15 years in the UK has really destroyed that. I've come back to Aotearoa 7 years ago and reconnected and got back on that pathway and see it as an obligation in which to promote and push not only te reo in the home, but also in the workspaces and environments that I spend my time in.
Yeah. Wow. So huge stuff there. And probably the really emotive one that I picked up on was, you know, as a teenager, you were challenging your parents even to the point of, you know, making accusations. And you know, this is a little bit that we've talked about in our posts and talked about in other shows. So just to share, in case people are watching now and don't know this part of our history, but the New Zealand government put in what I essentially refer to as a language eradication program. So it's actually called the 1867 Native Schools Act. And there was, I might get my details wrong, but there was at one point schools only for Māori, but with English teachers. And the aim was to teach them a set of subjects which was around becoming labourers, and which is one level of racism in itself, obviously. And the other was to assimilate to English language. So Māori was used in the beginning to be able to provide instruction to teach English, but then as English was capable, then Māori started getting beatings. And as one of my stories, the first story I ever came across was when I asked my friend to speak te reo with me on the classic expectation that he could because he was Māori. And he took me by surprise when he went, "Don't talk the devil's language to me." And I literally flinched and jumped back. We were sitting in the Kamo bar over in the North Shore. And I was like, "Baz, what are you doing?" And he explained that his mum had been beaten so traumatically that she would not allow her kids to be taught Māori for their safety. And just rocked me. And that's why I do what we're doing. So why do I, as a Pākehā, get involved in this kaupapa? It's to be an ally, to be a friend. Half my family happens to be Māori as well. So, when you look at it that way, and this is one of the things I love doing, I'll end on this, is that for those that look at this and go, "This is not my problem, what's it? Oh, who cares?" Just walk in another person's shoes, is the old saying, walk 1,000 miles in their shoes. So put yourself in the position of someone who is Māori and see the world from their view, and then you'll quickly understand the pain and the things that you're hearing, learning, seeing, and what this Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori is all about. So, yeah, thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, and just feeding on from that, just having to put myself in my parents' shoes and get their experiences and the impact. We focus on the fact that they were beaten, which was horrendous. But the further impact of them, why would you stay in a system where that happens? So the impact on education and the social inequity that's followed through from that, when you start to understand, and when I look at the choices that they made, it changed and altered my life. And in fact, now I feel just such a strong aroha around the predicament that some of them still face into. We've got kaumātua down our marae who are on a reo journey now, and it's our younger generation teaching the older generation how to speak te reo. And it's just a fascinating dichotomy around how everything's switched, and this dependency on those who have come through the system today and can speak, teaching our kaumātua. But it's also a beautiful thing. Shows how we need to just embrace it. And as long as we're embracing it, that's the main thing. And just to another point that you said, this is not one language over the other. What we're trying to do is revitalize and embrace our reo, because when you start to actually break it down, it is really a stunningly beautiful language. And even just from a greeting, when we say kia ora, and the general thought is that means hello. What we're saying is kia, let's, and ora, be healthy or well. So when I say kia ora to you, the intent behind just that simple word is much greater than hello. It's let's be the best that we can be. Let's live healthy. Let's live well. There's so much more meaning when you unravel just the basic words itself. And I'm by no means an expert in this. I'm still on my journey and will forever be on my journey of learning te reo and embracing it and unraveling it. But it is really a truly beautiful language.
It is indeed. And just as a little bit of comparison for everybody, the Italian language, which I learned, is classically, seen as a language of love or something. And the word hello, ciao, actually comes from the Venetian dialect. So it was only 1846 that Italian became Italian. So Italians will confirm that I speak schoolboy Italian, not a dialect. And you talk about kia ora being be well, be healthy, and an indication of the beauty of the language. The word ciao, which you say, ciao, That means be my slave.
Oh,
So
right.
not so beautiful, but it's believed to be beautiful. So when you were talking about that, it just made me think, you
Mm,
know, whether it's not really a home truth, but it's just enlightening to consider that because, yeah, when I was speaking with Neil Walker yesterday, and he was talking about pronunciation and how a lot of people, get different parts wrong, and I come to the conclusion that I get a lot wrong, but to be able to get better, breaking it down is I say some vowels correctly, but in the same word, we'll say other vowels still in my English pronunciation. And a classic one that he pointed out was when people say te reo, they'll get the R, they'll get the longer E, but then they'll use the English O, te reo.
mm,
So when you hear someone pronounce it, when I heard him pronounce it yesterday, I was able to do what I call parrot. So I just parrot the sound, and then you
mhm.
repeat it enough to know, and then it can replace your mispronunciation with your better pronunciation. Um, so for anyone out there who's learning a language, and obviously in particular learning te reo Māori, there's a little tip from my experiences. Don't know if it helps you, but hopefully it gives you some way forward in those areas. But coming back, you said you went away to the UK for 12 years and it affected your reo. That's also another common scenario. So Lee Timu, he went to university and similar thing. And that's what I'd like to sort of raise and discuss is that when we don't have the ability to speak it regularly, consistently, and not necessarily all the time, but say we spoke half English, half te reo through our day, that would be enough to keep it going. But yeah, 12 years. How's your 7-year journey been in terms of revitalizing your own te reo from that point?
Yeah, it was hard because the interesting thing, even though I was born and bred in Maputo, you come back and the next generations come through. So all those little kids are now big kids and adults, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of connection that needs to be made up in that. So even going home was, oh gosh, everyone's moved on, the world's changed a lot. And then coming into the workplace, I had some crazy notion that New Zealand had grown, we'd embraced things, and I got into the workplace and actually I was speaking at Russell McVeigh and told them the same story yesterday. I was so disappointed. Um, I was disappointed around that what I felt like was a lack of advancement. And we talk about being our authentic selves in the workplace, or mindfully authentic is kind of the language we're using.
Yeah.
But I couldn't be. I couldn't be. That part of me I needed to leave at the front door when I walked in. And I was really lucky to go on a course, and in that we talked a lot about purpose. And one of the things I read was articulate your purpose and have the courage to live it. And when I started forming through what I felt like was my obligation to make a difference around Māori, and I do see it as an obligation. I see it as an obligation for all of us to make a difference. It doesn't matter whether you're Māori or non-Māori. We live in Aotearoa, and there's an obligation on all of us for this to be successful. I really started focusing on, right, well, if I'm going to make a change, and Māori language is one of those changes, I'm going to start every email with kia ora. And I just happened to have a kōrero with a good friend, Andrew Baker, who'd been head of Māori strategy at Air New Zealand. And we'd been speaking about Māori language at Air New Zealand and how they were quite successful at that point in time, 7 years ago in New Zealand, around promoting Māori. He shared that it took 2 years to get that organisation, to get them all on board, to start their emails with kia ora. And
Wow.
today, like, what? But you look back then and you think, God, getting people just to embrace that one word at the beginning of their emails was quite a challenge. And then the other story he shared, when you travel on planes, you see pins of people who can speak different languages, so that you know that you can engage with them if you're a Swiss
Yes.
speaker or French speaker. To get the Māori pin, to go through the formal process to get a pin, you have to set a written exam. Now, if you were to go back to some of our kaumātua and queer to say, oh, you need to set this exam. Our language was not a written language. They would not pass that exam, yet they've probably got some of the most beautiful reo Māori language in the country. So I started to think around what's blocking us from being successful. There's from our language commission here in New Zealand, they were trying to say that people to wear this pin or to be acknowledged as a language, you needed to set this written exam. So the process is still broken and not really supporting I guess the advancement of it, and not in all areas, but in some areas, and that was a good example. So I
Quick
challenge
question.
myself. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Quick question. If you have to sit a written exam for te reo Māori, do you have to sit a written exam for every other language? Or do you just
Yeah,
stand there and say, Konnichiwa, watashi wa Ryan, san? No?
I hadn't gone through the process. We're just having this conversation about it.
Yeah.
It was still really interesting around who's defining who's our language speakers, and
Yes,
it's not around being experts. To me, it's just around giving it a go, embracing it, and not putting this Western thinking into into defining what our language is, I guess, is the crux of it. So I've taken that on board, and as part of trying to articulate my purpose and living to it, I've really been pushing within my workplace, setting up Māori Pacific teams, setting up language lessons, setting up tikanga lessons, just to try and create a more culturally competent place of work. So when Māori and Pacific people come in here, they feel like they belong. At the heart of not having our language, it broke down our sense of identity. And so having identity and bringing that language in a safe place to come means that we'll get more of us here. So that's really been my journey in a corporate sense, but personally, it's really about going home and going back to wānanga, relearning a lot of what I've unlearned, being back with my people who understand who I am, and me understanding where they are and on their journey. So it takes time and effort.
Yeah. And look, I just want to touch on something I think is quite poignant. And it's come up, and I haven't been able to articulate it in different ways, but I'll do my usual, which is use an example. And you talked about, not apply Western thinking to Māori, but being able to think and do in Māori. And, you get that when you get your immersion back home. And the point that I think is quite important for non-Māori is this whole, why do we need to do that? Or why do we have to speak Māori? Or why do they have, thinking of from the negative to the fully racist, right? And I was trying to articulate it in a sentence, but I think the best way is, if I put it back this way, when I go to one of my family events and I'm the only Pākehā at this part of the family, and it is full Māori, and all the things that I do or I know, my etiquette, my protocol, are all flipped and changed. Not all, but I suddenly feel like a fish out of water, and I go all quiet and polite in the corner, and my auntie will come up and go, "You all right?" I go, "Yeah, I'm okay." She goes, "Do you want some kai?" I said, "Yeah, I got some kai." She goes, "Get in there. If you don't get in there, it'll be gone." I was like, "Oh yeah, I was just waiting, and it's almost like a reversal, not necessarily. I don't want to do too much of a broad generalization, but if you think about what I'm trying to say is, when a person of one culture can't see and understand that a person of another culture wants to live and operate in their culture, which is what a lot of non-Kiwi or Pākehā, non-Māori or Pākehā do when it comes to this whole Māori picture, is that they expect them to just be like them. But then when you flip it like that, and another good example is, we're talking about this, all other ethnicities. If you think of, there's a classic little Chinatown in every city, and I don't know if that's not a way to describe it these days. It may not be appropriate, but also all the Kiwis, go back to your Aoe, right? All the Kiwis that live in Acton Town and live like Kiwis in London. So you won't be surprised to learn that when I did my Aoe, I didn't live with Kiwis. I didn't live in the Kiwi part of town. I visited, every now and then. But I live with Italians and Russians and French and German, and to completely immerse myself in the cultures of Europe, because that's part of what I thought the trip was meant to be about. So yeah, I think it's a really important thing for people to work out, and I'm going to somehow get a better succinct sentence about it. But I think Pākehā that aren't quite aware need to start thinking that, or being aware that that te ao Māori. You know, I'm just trying to put it in practical sense. I'll stop there because I'm dragging on a bit. But I think you get what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, but I think it's important. I think it's context on both sides. In order to get traction around our reo, and we were talking about this yesterday at Russell McVeigh, funnily enough, we've had to have a period of activism and people being quite strong around holding on to it. And we all fear, it's human nature to fear things that we don't know. And I'm going to be brave enough to say there's a lot of Māori out there who haven't been connected back to their own environments, and they're just as fearful of going back onto a marae, or being Māori and not being able to speak Māori. Comes with a lot of a sense of I don't know, fear is probably where it's at. So we all need to bring context, whatever position we're in this journey. And I see our role as breaking down that fear and taking people on the journey with us. And all our journeys at different places, but it's a journey for Aotearoa, and we just need to embrace it. And we've all got to play that role of putting context, whatever side we're sitting on. And so part of the work that I do here with our amazing people who are really trying to advocate it as well, is educating people who don't know, so that they feel more comfortable to give it a go. And if you get it wrong, we won't be unafraid to correct you, to say, you know, it's actually pronounced like this. Did you know it's called takapuna because, and this is how we say it correctly. Let me help you with that. And then when they say it wrong again, because you're never going to get it right the first time, actually, do you remember what I said last time? It's actually takapuna. And so you just take people on the journey, and we need to be kind around all of this. And so I think as long as we take that approach of putting ourselves in someone else's context and being kind about how we get on it, we can be successful in this.
Yeah. And to that point, it reminded me, I was down at the University of, and I'm going to overthink it and get it wrong, University of Waikato. And yeah. I said it like a Pākehā would, Waikato, you know, with the cat, and the guy who was I was interviewing, this was for the artwork, and it was it Boone on they call it Boone on something. So it's the doing this artwork wasn't solely Māori, but I was interviewing this artist, and his piece of artwork was Māori. And this guy, who's like the size of a front row himself, just very kindly said, "Oh, do you mind if you say Waikato?" And again, if I mispronounce it, you'll get the point that he said it perfectly right. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry," but we were having this huge talk and banter, and then he softly goes, "Would you mind saying Waikato?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry," you know. So it's always stuck in my mind, because we went from this huge like banter and laugh about other stuff to this very polite, softly spoken request from this massive dude. So yeah, it always touched me in that sense, and reminded me. And that's, yeah, I think that's the way to go, because I would love to be kindly corrected. I don't even mind if people take the piss out of me, but I do want to be corrected, because I want to be correct. I don't want people to think, "Oh, you know, you're not making enough effort, you're this, you're that," or whatever, think anything negative and not say anything to me. That would, yeah, that has happened. So it's as you might imagine, I find it a little bit hard to deal with, because it's like, I'm trying to get it right, I want to be better, but if no one picks it up. So for example, when I was talking with Neil yesterday, and he does, you know, the TV news presenting pronunciation, some of the things that he taught me in terms of pronunciation, I've never heard from any other teacher. And I've worked with a range from friends through to more formal paid teaching to Kaumātua. I don't know if you know Bobby Newson, just up our street. So yeah, but he went into some real detail. So yeah, I think there's opportunity for us to all improve together, which is quite cool. So just coming back to our questions, because time's racing away on us, I've probably talked way too much, I'm getting excited. But we've kind of covered some of these areas, but I wanted to focus on the acceleration I think I've seen, but I wanted to get your thoughts in terms of over, say, the last 2 years and even this week by comparison to last year's Te Wiki Aotearoa Māori. But would you agree that the things are really starting to accelerate in a positive way?
Oh, 100%. I think even just since I've come back to New Zealand, what TV1 has done, the work that Scotty and Stacey Morrison have put into improving the pronunciation on place names. Just this week, our good weatherman, presenting all in te reo, it's fascinating, and I think it needs to be seen in order to make that public comfortable with it. And there is negativity, not everyone's on board with this. It takes generations to change, even internally it's taken 3 generations for us to get, our kids coming out fluent in te reo. And there's just some that won't embrace it, but that's okay. It's not okay, but it's okay. You've got to fight with those that you can make the change with and not worry about those that you can't. And the challenge is social media. Social media gives platforms and safety behind which that negative commentary can come through. But let's not waste our time on things that we can't change and spend time on things that we can. I think there's a big drop, though, in the corporate world, this environment, social governance and responsibility is really interesting because it's forcing organisations who actually employ 80% of New Zealand, it's forcing them to take a good look at themselves, and Māori values are starting to underpin. As we can see, we don't put people at the centre of our ecosystem. We're just part of a broader ecosystem, and that focus on that whole environmental piece. People are really starting to understand the value in Māori thinking, but the Māori thinking comes out of our Māori language, and it's part and parcel of all of that. And as we start to see that shift in organisations, we've had Carleen Everett being appointed here at ANZ, and in the last year, the influence and that thinking in this workspace has been phenomenal, because it's creating a platform and a place where, one, our leadership must buy into it, and as long as the leadership's bought into it, the rest of the organisation starts to get on board. So from place of work, we're seeing this big transition, and that's hugely positive. And then I think the general public, the journey's a little bit harder. The enforcing of learning history and what colonisation has done, I think, is going to be another. There needs to be empathy around why we would change, and I think getting that understanding out there more broadly in the teaching in schools, or mandating the teaching in schools, is going to be a game changer. And the combination of all this activity and then having role models in workplaces and spaces out there is all part of it. We're accelerating. How quickly we accelerate, not sure. There's actually not enough Māori language teachers out there. I certainly know in the schools that my children have gone to, down in the Whanganui region, that they had one Māori teacher for 4 schools or 5 schools. So they've had to convert to doing online teaching for Māori, which is not helpful. We are kanohi ki te kanohi people, and our language requires kanohi ki te kanohi, in my opinion. So we need to be together in order that we can converse. It's a journey, but we're definitely accelerating. There's still a whole lot more work behind it. I was at a conference probably 3 months ago, and I was talking to one man in an organisation, and someone left their organisation because he had started his email. We had Māori in his email. He goes, I'm not working at an organisation. And it was a story that he shared with me. So it just goes to show there's still some really heavy challenges out there that we need to face into. Yeah.
Well, I come from Dunedin, and there is the classic, you remember it went across, I think, everything, whereas the phone call from the radio station with the lady who refused to pronounce. So we would call it Tyree and I think the correct, I can't even see the spelling in my head. I've got my letters around the wrong way, but Haere would be the more correct pronunciation. But yeah, I mean, that's Dunedin. I mean, that was my parents, right? So that was my parents. And my auntie married a Māori guy, and there was initial resistance to that. Again, you can't lie about it. And then they got to the point where Dad brought a Māori dictionary, and I think one of the other big moments, so he's learned probably about as much Māori as I have, but done it at his own pace over the years. But what was the other thing? Oh, so I've told this story before, but when my nana died, my mum's mum, so it's her sister, my auntie. When Nana died, so my auntie is from a second marriage and younger, so she grew up with Nana. She's only 5-7 years older than myself, right? So we grew up more like brother and sister. So when Nana died, she wanted a tangi, and initially the rest of the family said, no, we're not Māori, why would we do that? And there's resistance, and you can imagine at the time of a funeral when everyone's grieving, and eventually they agreed and said, okay, you're the youngest, you grew up with Māori the most in the last few years, so yeah, your wishes, you go for it. And you might be it's quite heartwarming that now we like to do every funeral as a tangi, because the experience of sitting there I'm not sure what the term is, but sitting there, and my mum said, I sat there and spoke to my mum for 3 days and talked to her about stuff, and then I go away and have a cup of tea, and I come back and have another chat to her. Initially it freaked them all out. That was the thing, having the body there. But then they saw it as a way to grieve in terms of talking to them and whatnot, and absolutely adore the process compared to the here's a wooden casket for 40 minutes of a funeral, right? And you don't even see the person inside it. So you talked about the Māori language having some beauty and the culture having some beauty, and there's a little story of Pākehā adoption of Māori customs. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So hey, we're just on time, and I do have one more question, if it's okay, and closing remarks. Are you okay for time? Cool.
Yes.
So our third question is, what would you like to see? What do you think needs to continue to happen? What could we do? There's no sort of fixed, finite question, but how do we keep going in the future? What are your personal thoughts and ambitions for what could happen?
Oh, that's a big one. Personal ambition is carrying on as we are. The school system needs to make te reo Māori compulsory. If it's to be New Zealand's language as we purport it to be, then we need to really act on it and show the proof in the pudding. So that's what I would like to see, that it's embraced fully. I think even in workplaces, that continued adoption of onboarding Indigenous thinking into the way we orientate, because a lot of our success is driven by our people seeing themselves in roles where they can get some of that equity in society. In the field that I work in technology, we're trying really hard to create a space where Māori can grow into, and there's a lot of work going in, and you had Lee on here, you've had Dan, you've had Kay Marie, they're doing amazing work in each of the parts of the ecosystem that they play in, trying to drive change. And technology is going to outstrip our primary exports as one of the products, New Zealand's trade products, and so we need to be focusing on those areas where we can one, ethically look at what we're doing. So technology underpins everything we do, from the way we use Facebook to the way we interact with our people. And if we're not designing systems with Māori thinking in mind, we're going to continue to perpetuate a lot of the colonisation that exists in society today. So I'd like to think we'd spend time looking at our technologies, putting design principles and the way we design tech for our people, which will help uplift that equity and access. So that's kind of where I'm trying to make change. But underpinning all that, reo has to underpin everything we do. We shouldn't be working with technologies that don't support te reo Māori. We should be looking at, from a papatua, nuku and kaitianga perspective, what we're doing with our technology assets as we finish with them. You know, if we can put that thinking in this space, it's going to be amazing. So yeah, that's it, I think. And I just want to touch on one in terms of a closing remark. You mentioned growing up in Dunedin. My parents in their retirement, my mum's a teacher and my dad's probably picked up being a teacher in that space. They went down to the South Island to Māruia, very small community, very, very Pākehā community, and they took their Māori thinking and ways into there, and they were challenged quite significantly from the outset, just from getting the place name right. This isn't called Māruia, this place is called Māriwia, and so, but stuck to their guns, and it set up a little kapahaka group, and some of the biggest challenges soon started coming along to look at their, observe their mokopuna doing kapahaka, and started to integrate some Māori thinking into the school. So, you know, as long as we've got the people out on the front line continuing to do the fight with the younger generation who really are our future, we're in good hands. So that's a big mihi atu to my parents and the work that they do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And yes, some really good views on the future in terms of, I like that point that really brings it home, where we can't just perpetuate what we've already had in the past. We have to do things to make a change. So in terms of embedding Māori thinking in technology and design, and I put it up on LinkedIn that potentially, because now Microsoft owns LinkedIn, Māori could be a language that's put in there, you know, with all the Māori that's available across Minecraft and the Māori keyboard, and he also said that it's in I think like the likes of Word and all the Microsoft tools. So I was kind of like, well, then it's even easier to get it into LinkedIn. So they are working on that. Like, that discussion has started. So, you know, like, I think that 10 years ago people would have gone, oh, nah, the language isn't big enough, not enough users. Whereas today it's, yeah, good idea. Let's start looking into how we can, when can we get it done? What does it take to get it done by? You know, so that whole mindset to it's possible, and not just that, but we're doing it, is really quite exciting. So if we can see that happen across all those areas that you talked about, then yeah, that would be amazing. That would be really cool. So we're just coming up to a close, and you've kind of shared some closing remarks around your parents and their shift and how they were able to start getting a bit of change happening down south, which is good. But I'll just do a little bit of a summary, and if you have any further closing remarks, you're more than welcome. But if you feel like you've shared enough, you choose. It's completely your time. But we've been speaking to Megan Tapsell today around Te Wiki Aotearoa Māori, and this has been our 2022 edition or series, and we had a recap from our 2020. We took 2021 off to leave space for others to pick up and carry the light on, but I thought to myself I wanted to continue to support and not do 35 interviews, but just do 8. So again, a balance of leaving some space. And we heard from Megan about her journey, having been a child and challenging, even to the point of accusing her parents about why they weren't speaking more Māori, and that's part of her journey related to the story of how the language was tried to be assimilated to English by the government back in the 1860s through. So then went on to learn, and went on to university and learn, and was speaking very, am I right to say, fluently. But then went overseas for 12 years, and that, of course, affected it. So it's the classic, when you don't have the environment, you do lose your language. And I've expressed that about my Italian, which I was in the same place, spoke it fluently or well for 3 years, and then came back here and lost it. So it just talks to the fact we need to have constant environments, and potentially in the future we'll be speaking half Māori, half English through our day. But we need the people who can speak Māori to be able to have that other person to converse with, and to be able to have meaningful conversations for it to grow and accelerate. So that's probably a good route. There is more, obviously, but I just didn't want to take too much more time, because we talked about the acceleration and covered the points there and what could happen in the future, which we just heard. So with that, Megan, do you have any further thoughts you'd like to close out on or leave people with?
Just one. My very good friend, Tina Wilson, actually from NZTE, she's based up in Taiwan. She sent out an email yesterday, and I just read what she had to say, and it's poignant right now. It says, "Tōku reo, tōku ohoho, ko tōku reo, tōku māpihi mauria." So our language is our treasure. And so if there's one remark I want to say, it's actually our treasure, but it's all of our treasure. It belongs to all of us. So let's keep fighting that good fight. Kia haere tonu.
Awesome. Tēnā koe. So, so I have a question. One question.
Okay.
I learned the word fire, and then I used it with a to, like I'd say, matua te whenua walker. So I might say fire Tapsell, but then the person was like, "I'm not that old, mate." So in the dictionary it says fire is the word for auntie, but I originally got taught it as a term of respect, like fire, and for men matua, and then ultimately kaumatua. But if fire is for an older generation, what is the word below? Is it wahine, or is there another word other than woman that I should address you as? Wahine Tapsell, fire Tapsell, or what would be correct?
No, yeah, so fire we do use for like our aunties, and I guess contextually when we're growing up, they always looked a lot older, and you go, "Oh, kia ora whaia," or as you go around the marae. So it would be an auntie in that very sort of traditional sense. And actually, I was down in Nelson and Mapua, and I was out in a pub probably about 3 years ago, and there was this, I say young boy, he's in his 20s, and he goes, "Oh, kia ora whaia," and I was like, "What? I don't look that old." And actually in the workplace, they've started calling me whaia, because you got to realize where you are in that cycle of getting older. So I've reached that peak. I think I've been called whaia from all the nieces and whatever else. So yeah, you're quite right. In its term, it's auntie, but it is also a term of respect for your elderly. In terms of referring to your young ones, there's no preface. You just use their ingoa or their name. If you refer to your partner, you might say your hoa wahine, your female partner, or your hoa rangatira, which is what I like my husband to say. I'm his rangatira. So yeah, there's nothing really that I would just say name.
Okay, well, that answers that question for me, and I've had some learning in my te reo today. So it brings us to a close here. Thank you so much again. Tēnā rawa atu koe. My favorite saying, thank you very much. And I think each time I pronounce one part of it differently. So please do correct me if you hear things that there's opportunity to help me with. And a huge thank you, and I really appreciate your time. So with that, we can both say ka kite anō to everybody out there.
Ka kite anō.